All right, so here we are in week 2, and this is our short week because of the holidays, so things are a little truncated and a little bit of confusion with some due dates for some people, and I apologize for that. It was a little bit of confusion on my side too, because it wasn't quite clear how those should be handled for the online sections with the holiday. So the first project is due tonight. So you will probably see my feedback on that tomorrow. But a few of you have already turned that in, and those of you still working on it, you have a few more hours. And there's Judah. Welcome to the course. Just getting started. Also, I have given feedback on your week 2 explorations. So those are in now. Take a look at my feedback there, because typically you will get a 100 score on that. One way or another, as long as you've met the requirements, but I will give feedback to point out some things that I see, make comments on and observations on what you've posted. No problem. Glad you can make it, and so you haven't really missed anything as yet. Other updates. Let's see. As I said, I'll be looking at your projects tomorrow, and then we'll move on to this week's analysis activity. Again, looking at the You Cannot Hide It ad, but this time through from the perspective of color, the use of color in the ad. And I think that is all that I have. We're back on the regular schedule now, so projects will be due regularly on Sunday nights. Are there any questions or any concerns that I could address before we dive into the content? Okay, so we are talking this week about color. And color in use of media, or color use in the design of media. And here's, I'm going to put up some slides, and these are some familiar brands, and this is to illustrate what an integral role that color plays in the things that we find familiar, the brands and the images that we find familiar. These are some that you probably are pretty familiar with. Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. But look at what happens when you reverse those color schemes. There's sort of, even just beyond the conscious recognition that those aren't the right colors, it kind of throws off your recognition of the brand to a pretty deep level, doesn't it? It's, even on a cursory glance, you would recognize Starbucks, but that would take away that easy recognition. Here's a couple more. Yeah, and Judah says he looked at the word Dunkin' Donuts and saw Starbucks. A couple more that are pretty recognizable and have very recognizable color schemes. And again, reversing those, you can see how much that affects the image of those brands, just making those changes. So it's clear that color plays a pretty big role in how we consume media, how we recognize brands and logos, and is a pretty important part of what we do. The vision being our primary sense, for the most part. Color is a big part of that. Yeah, and there's looking at that again. It really just changes the vibe altogether, doesn't it? So we're going to explore a little bit of why that is in this week's content from a really broad perspective. We're going to look at two topics in particular, and those are color theory and color psychology. Color is something that has been investigated for centuries by visual artists, going back probably to the time of cave paintings, but certainly by the time the Renaissance came around, they had it down pretty well and had codified it. In fact, I think the first color wheels were developed around that time. So color theory is that formal study that that artists have done, that people, even scientists who study vision, have helped contribute to, and that is the study of color and how colors relate to one another and how we perceive them. And then color psychology is more of what we just experienced, that recognition of colors as having meaning, either symbolic meaning or just a recognizable meaning in the brands or the symbols that we see around us. So let's start off by looking a little more at color psychology. When you see these two colors, not just the two colors individually, but when they're paired together, what meanings come to mind? Fun stuff? Could you tell me a little more about that? What kind of fun stuff comes to mind? Twister, Christmas, and cereal. Okay, interesting. Twister, the game Twister, is that something I might be forgetting? Is that on the box? The boxes? Oh, and the color dots as well. That's right, on the game mat. And cereal. Christmas is a good one there. It is too early for Christmas. I'm very ready for Halloween though. But one that usually comes that everyone mentions is the street traffic lights, stop and go, and there'd be a yellow one in here. I don't think there's actually a stop or a go sign. Maybe there are somewhere, but stop sign is a little more recognizable. But we know even before we can drive that green means go and red means stop. And there's even that children's game, red light, green light, that at least I played as a child, that draws on that. And then also Christmas. And it is too early for Christmas, but we, as residents of the United States in particular, but in Western countries, probably recognize red and green as the at least unofficial colors of Christmas. That has been pretty ingrained in us, even if we aren't those who celebrate the holiday. It is everywhere in the advertising, in the stores, and so on, and decorations that are all around. So it becomes ingrained into us, and that's where a lot of color psychology comes from. Is not necessarily instinctive. It's not that visceral level innate traits, but things that we learn through our culture and through our upbringing and just our life experiences. Things like traffic lights and Christmas. And even, I mentioned Halloween, which is what, orange and black, right? Is the typical Halloween colors. So these are things that we just come to know and to recognize. And you'll see often it's mentioned how you should be aware of other cultures. Like in China, red is the color of good fortune, and you see that on the Chinese New Year, all the red decorations and the envelopes, and also at weddings as well. Whereas white, which we often in our culture is seen at weddings is actually the color that they would wear to a funeral. So it's very different. So that's a part of their culture that they would experience, just like the examples here are more from our American culture. So a lot of this is culturally dependent. I think the Linda lesson, in the Linda lesson, I think it was the source, he makes a point of saying, don't worry too much about that as a designer. If you have an ad that has red in it, a Chinese citizen is not going to look at that and immediately think you're talking about Chinese New Year just because it has red. But just be aware of that. If you're making a reference to something related to those topics, be aware of those differences. If your audience is going to include international viewers. So let's look at a few instances of where color psychology comes into play. How do you see the color playing a role here? I think I may have used this one last week, but I'm not sure. But how does color play a role in this ad design? Okay, it's energetic. And Judah says red is associated with speed and danger, which that is very true, especially with danger, which is generally accepted as being edgy or cool. But also notice the tagline, like rekindle the flame of desire. Another association with red is often passion and strong emotion. Yeah, and you see that at Valentine's Day with all the red candy and hearts and red flowers and so on. So that's something that they're really leveraging here, is that association with strong emotion. And I'd mentioned that most of color psychology is learned and not necessarily innate. There are exceptions to that, in fact, and red happens to be one of those exceptions. And this is, I believe, in the textbook reading from this week's exploration in the Design for Hackers textbook. He mentions this, and that is something called the red effect. And this is really interesting to me because I'm a nerd about this sort of thing, but interesting effect that the presence of red in our environment will have a very slight effect on our rational thinking abilities, to where sports teams, if one team in a sporting event is wearing a mostly red uniform, they will tend to win statistically slightly more often. And this also applies in video games like Halo, where it's the red team versus the blue team. The red team has a tiny edge, and this is something that is known and has been observed. Also, in Target, as Randy mentioned, Target's master plan, Target stores have all that red branding, all that red signage and labels, and the textbook mentions that. It mentions that phenomenon where you walk into a Target store looking, with the intention of buying toilet paper and walk out with $100 worth of clothes and home decor, because that red effect has that little impact on your decision-making ability. Your ability to resist impulse buys. Where does this come from? There's some speculation that it is because of the color of our blood. Red is usually indicating that there's injury, there's harm. So our our instinct is to get away. So we kind of drop out of rational thinking mode into instinctive mode. And so that takes over, and it's just a environmental cue. So there's that, but this is something that exists. So it's an interesting phenomenon. It doesn't play a huge role in media design, but it is a factor and something to consider. A lot of times, if you do Google searches for color psychology, you'll see something like this: a chart, sometimes a little summary of different color meanings, and it was even in the Linda lesson as well. This is a good reference to look at. I wouldn't stick to this kind of thing religiously, for lack of a better word. It isn't a prescription for these specific impressions. As Judah said a moment ago, it's context. No, that was Randy said. Context is important, and that's true here too. Always consider the context, the association. If your subject is an accounting firm, using a red logo isn't going to make it exciting. It's still an accounting firm. So think of the context, but and also think of those cultural factors. What do these colors tend to mean to us? A lot of times you will see blue used for more serious businesses, like IBM's on here. I believe that's Westinghouse, HP, probably. Oh, wait, there's JP Morgan. Because it is a very formal appearing color. If you think about formal wear, a lot of time is using those darker blues. Even our authority figures, police officers, wear the blue uniforms. Very often, that is kind of iconic for police uniforms. And I would almost say that for more traditional brands, you'll usually see the primary colors, the red, the yellow, and blue. Whereas those that are a little more trendy or upbeat or have more of a fun quality will use the secondary and even tertiary colors. And almost the farther you go from the primaries, the more quirky they become. So when you get to purple, you have Barbie and, well, Taco Bell's on the list, but and Sci-Fi Channel. You do have a few more formal brands. T-Mobile's on there, and Hallmark, but for the most part, you start getting into more of a visual impression that is a little more artsy, a little more quirky. You probably wouldn't see a bank with a purple or a pink logo, just because we don't associate that with the formal qualities that we would want associated with a bank. So while these are good references to start from, really use your judgment and think about what the general public is going to perceive with this, what kind of impression you want to make. Yeah, purple is considered a color of royalty. I think that was something that came from kind of medieval times, when purple was a more difficult color to create. So that is something that you often hear. I would say if you think about public figures now that are associated with the color purple, though, you see, I think of Prince, which, as it happens, is a royal title, but and Willy Wonka comes to mind as well, because I think he has that in the newer film, had the jacket that was more of a purplish red. But I'm digressing a bit there. This has been dealing with the use of color as to convey brand identities. And that's an important part of what we're going to do as media professionals, and directly relevant to what we're doing with the mood board project for week 2. So as you consider your own personal brand, think about what kind of colors you would want to associate with that brand. And I'll get into that a little bit more towards the end of the course or the lesson tonight. By the way, I'm at my home office, I say in quotes, tonight. So if you hear a guest appearance by my cats, please excuse them. Another aspect, though, of color psychology when it comes to media is in the use in the making of TV and film. This infographic is one that I always like to show because first it takes an insane amount of work to create, but it shows some interesting information. Have you guys watched the show Breaking Bad? Which is now run its course, but was very popular for a long time there. You're not the only person on earth who hasn't. I've actually had quite a few classes of people who have not seen it. So, okay. Well, if you ever plan to watch it, I'm going to have some spoilers right now. And for those of you watching the archive, if you don't want some spoilers for Breaking Bad, fast forward through this part. What this infographic shows is the colors associated with all of the major characters in the show in every episode from every season of Breaking Bad, which to think that someone sat down and documented this is impressive, but it's very useful, at least for me, because it gives me something to show you guys. The character of Jesse Pinkman, and if you haven't watched this, you won't be familiar with him, but he's a young man. He makes meth, which is the premise of the show, but he's very temperamental. He's a hothead and runs off at the mouth a lot, and just this very explosive personality. And if you look at his timeline, you see a lot of warm colors, reds and yellows in here, at least for the first half of the series, and it tends to change a little bit and shifts as we move along. So this is kind of what we would expect to see, isn't it? For someone that is a hothead, you literally see hot colors, warm colors. And what this is talking about is the clothes he's wearing, the color of the room he's in, the car he's driving, the furniture, what have you, things that are associated with that character in a given scene. So let's look at some examples. For the first several episodes, it's all red and yellow. And there's some splashes of darker, more colorless hues, black and gray and white. But right here, there's that big block of black. And this is indicated with the number 3, which, looking at our legend, it says he's abducted by Tuco. And Tuco is sort of a drug lord in the show. So that's something terribly bad has just happened to him. And I don't remember exactly what was going on. He was abducted, so he might have been in a trunk of a car or in a dark room. But suddenly he goes from all red to all black. And that corresponds with the action that's taking place on screen. It helps to underscore the mood of the scene. Apparently things get better because we return to the more upbeat, warm colors. Then right down here at number 5, marker number 5, it goes from red to sort of a grayish green. So something happens at that point that kind of takes all the emotion out. And what happened at that point is it says Jane dies, and that's his girlfriend at the time. And so you see how that just took all that feeling out of the character. And it kind of goes from bad to worse, and he goes into rehab at point 6, and it goes from this gray-green to black and white and gray, so achromatic, no color for a while there. And it's interesting because, and it's my mantra for all of the things that we study this month, is nothing is left to chance. All of this is planned out well in advance by the director, by the colorists. In fact, you see the quote down here by Vince Gilligan saying, "I want to do the color timing for each of these episodes, where you sit with the colorist and make sure the color of each individual scene is just the way you want it." So again, nothing is left to chance. So all of these colors for all these characters is selected very strategically based on color psychology. And I haven't introduced warm versus cool colors, but you guys have seen it in the Linda lesson as well as the readings, so you know that the warm colors tend to be more energetic, whereas cool colors are more subdued. So you see, even comparing the characters, Skylar White, who's the main character's wife, you would probably infer that she's probably more mellow, more of a stable character than Jesse Pinkman. Another example, and I hope you've seen The Matrix. Otherwise, there will be some spoilers here as well. So is that, yes, you have seen The Matrix, good. And I'm actually drawing from all three films, even though I know a lot of people reject the second and third from existing. So in The Matrix, we have people that are existing in a virtual world. It's not the real world, although some of them don't know that at first. And in fact, we, on at least the first time we saw that, hopefully didn't know that either. It was kind of a twist about halfway through the film. But what they did, the filmmakers did, is give everything this very unearthly, unnatural green cast. So you see Morpheus here. The environment's all green, and we'd expect the trees to be green, but even the buildings and even his skin tone has that slight green cast to it. So it kind of is a subtle visual cue that this isn't quite right, that something's not right, but they haven't really revealed what. And anytime they're in the Matrix, which is this virtual world, you see that change in the color. But when they get out of the Matrix into what is the real world in the movie, the coloration takes on more of a natural look. And in fact, there's more of the warm colors that to us tell us there is life here. It's more vital and more energetic. This scene is kind of an extreme example from the movies because they're at a celebration and everybody is dancing, so they're all very very sweaty and worked up. But this is how it is, how they cue that change. And then a third environment, when they leave the safety of the last human refuge and go out into this post-apocalyptic world, everything is this bluish gray look. It's very dim, but it's that color cue that they're out of safety. They're into an environment that is lifeless. It is not that vital, warm color anymore. So these color cues are used in many films. In fact, if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, pay attention to the use of the colors blue and orange to indicate when they're in danger and when they've made it to safety, because the filmmakers have used that in that film to create that psychological cue. And Randy, you said that's what it looks like to be deployed in the Navy. Is that on board the ships? Yeah, very gray. I've gotten to tour a few of them. I actually spent a lot of my career working for the Navy, believe it or not, developing, writing training, e-learning training for them. Are there any questions so far on any of these topics? So a knowledge of color psychology is going to inform you on your color choices. At the most basic level in developing, say, your personal brand, or if you're working for a client, you'll want to pick a color that really captures the the energy of your subject. So it could be you personally, it could be whatever client you're working with, that has the right look, the right energy, the right just overall vibe. In the assignment for the week 2 part of your mood board, it talks about this. This is something that it asks you to consider. So, if you want to make a more rugged look, maybe some more earth tones might be included in there. Here, brown described as a very rugged color in logo design. The more energetic, warm colors for more upbeat brands, or more formal blues, or even deep reds for more formal uh, uh, brand identities. So now, but we've been looking at kind of individual colors and how they indicate a mental cue or meaning. So now we'll switch gears a little bit to color theory, which is more about how colors relate to one another, how they interact visually. So we're not necessarily emotionally, although that still plays a part. This is more of just simply the visual impression that they create. So I'm going to throw out a few examples. These are posters from the movie Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which is one of my favorite movies. But these are actually fake movie posters that were created for that film. They appear probably in the background somewhere. But they're really great examples because they purposely kind of exaggerate stereotypical examples of movie posters. Let's start with this one. Looking at the color in particular, the use of color, what kind of impression does this one make? And why? There is definite action, as Randy says. In fact, the movie is called Action Doctor. Can't explain what it says to me without using the words Action Doctor. Yeah, there's obviously some action. There's an explosion, which immediately says action, and the title is Action Doctor. But you have that that bright, exciting splash of orange against the blue blue background. And yeah, it is very literal, and that's something that these posters really show. They really took the typical movie poster to an extreme. But it's that strong contrast, that explosion literally of orange against the blue background, that contrast that creates they describe it as a vibration, I think, in the textbook, because those colors are competing for our color receptors in our eyes. Yeah, and the looks like a sniper's crosshair there too, huh? So now Lucas Lee in Let's Hope There's a Heaven is the movie title. So what kind of look do the colors create in this case with the floating head? It's warm, billowy romance. Yes, exactly, Judah. That is precisely correct. And what the difference is that the colors now aren't clashing. They're not contrasting. They're very similar to one another. It's warm yellows going into kind of orange and red, and even into a little bit of violet in the sunset. But they're all very harmonious with very little contrast. No clashing colors. And a third one. This is our achromatic example, almost achromatic. So what kind of vibe would you expect from this movie? What kind of feel would you get? What would you expect to see in this movie? It is very, very Mel Gibson. I agree. I think with the black and white, the chromatic look, it kind of gives a very serious and kind of hard-edged look, doesn't it? Something very tense, especially associated with the look on his face, and then that splash of red. There's that danger, right? That warning of danger. You just don't exist. So we can expect this to be probably some kind of suspense film that has a very hard edge. So these are all examples of our major color relationships as defined on the color wheel. Have either of you ever worked with a color wheel? Yeah. Okay, so yes for Randy, no for Judah, and that's okay. Unless you've really gotten into some art classes, you may not have really encountered this, but it's something that is a handy reference when you're working with color. I won't get into the specifics, but it is based on how our eyes process color, because those colors that are opposites are actually competing for our color receptors because of the wavelengths of the light. And so those that are opposites will have that conflict, that very jarring look when they're paired next to each other, whereas those that are close to each other are harmonious. They're more subtle and easy on the eyes, literally easy on the eyes. And based on those two ideas, they've arranged the colors to demonstrate those relationships. And based on those two ideas, those that are close together are harmonious. Those that are farther apart become more contrasting, more clashing. You get all of the basic color relationships. Okay, at Full Sail in 2002, you worked with the color wheel. Then this should be pretty familiar. And here is that warm versus cool relationship. And I'm kind of repeating some of the stuff from the Linda lesson on these slides, but just to reiterate, Warm colors have a sense of action and excitement, which we saw with the Breaking Bad chart. Also, they have an interesting visual effect in that they appear to pop out towards the viewer. Whereas cool colors, and those are the colors that look more like water or ice or have cool sensation, blues and violets and deeper greens, tend to recede away, and so they will look like they're further in the distance, and they have a more calm and subdued feeling. Some quick terminology. Every color on the color wheel is called a hue. So if you hear the term hue, sometimes these are used interchangeably to just refer to color, but hue means a pure color, pure yellow or green or yellow-green. A shade is a darker variety of that color. That's, if you're working with paint, you would mix black paint into the color hue to make a darker shade. And a tint is a lighter variety of the hue. So with paint, you would mix in some white paint and get a lighter color. So pink is actually a tint of red, and lavender is more of a tint of violet, and so forth. And so if you hear me use these terms, that's what I mean. The one that's not shown on here is a what is it? Oh goodness, the name is escaping me. A tone, yes, a tone of the hue. And that is if you mix in gray, if you're working with paint, and it is more of a matter of the saturation of the color rather than lightness and darkness or value. It is simply the intensity of the color is the tone. If you're just working with one single color, and that includes the tones, shades, and tints of that color, then you are creating what is called a monochromatic image. And this is an example from the fine arts world by Pablo Picasso. So this is a monochromatic blue painting. Only blue is used anywhere in this painting. It might be very light tints, like we have in the almost white portions, the highlights, or very dark shades, like the deep shadows, but it's all still blue, so you don't see any other colors. You still can get a sense of depth and shape and form, but there isn't any color variety because it's all one color. Tends to be clean and elegant and has a low energy because you don't have any contrast. And that also depends on whether you're using a warm color or a cool color. Cool colors will be more low energy, whereas warm colors are higher. And again, the context, like we said earlier, really matters here. It's going to be a subdued mood and energy, but the way you interpret it can depend on the imagery that it's used with. Like the hereafter poster is more light. It's more kind of a mellow, calm feel using the monochromatic blue, whereas Jurassic World, the blue is used more to create a sense of shadow and darkness and this underwater scene. Certainly not subdued or mellow because you have this giant prehistoric monster. This is basically a scene from A Nightmare for Me, about to eat a shark. And Randy, I want to say this one was yours, but I'm not sure. Okay. And it's some examples of warm monochromatic, and you see the difference in the energy. It's more action-oriented, or in case of the red, has a little bit more of the creepy vibe. And when you're working with monochromatic colors, a lot of times the brightness and the use of shadow plays a big part, because this could easily be really upbeat using the same colors, but because they've used all the deep shades as well as the shadows, it takes on a much more grim and foreboding look. Yeah, like this one right here, the romance poster, which actually in this case that's more of an analogous color scheme, but sometimes there's a very fine line. So monochromatic is fine if that suits your purpose, but sometimes you need more color variety and more color richness to create the impression you want, as we saw with these. And that's where those two rules that I mentioned earlier come into play. Colors farther apart on the color wheel, more contrast, and thus more exciting, more energetic. Those closer together, more harmonious, more subdued, and a little less energetic. And that's the analogous colors. So complementary, and I want to reiterate the term complementary because it's so often misinterpreted and misused. It doesn't just mean they work well together. It specifically means they are opposites on the color wheel and have very high contrast, very high energy. And analogous are the opposite. Here's our analogous example. An example from Fine Art World. Not the Blue Nude by Pablo Picasso, as it says. This is actually a Claude Monet painting, and I don't know the specific title. But you can see how the colors are relatively close to each other. And so it has a very calm look. Almost the same color scheme here in Bug's Life. So it's not really an action movie. It is, a family movie, a Pixar film. So a little bit more calm, more subdued look. Doesn't mean it's not fun, because you do have the quirky little bug looking through the hole there. And this would be more of a cool color in the cool analogous realm. And here's the warm analogous colors. And we talked about this one at the before class, Randy. This is one of yours. And this one is almost monochromatic. You could call this monochromatic, and no one would blame you. But doesn't that look very kind of unsettling, very menacing, and very foreboding? It's like the world is on fire almost, which in the war zone is not totally inaccurate. But also kind of serene. And the context is important here, because aren't these colors almost the same as what we saw in the romance film? And yet the context makes it an entirely different meaning. But you can certainly see how the cool colors versus the warm colors really affects the energy level. And just to keep this sort of media neutral, here's an example from web design of using analogous colors. So very harmonious. Not really formal. It's still, it's a fun design, but is not super high energy, but enough color diversity to allow them to have some color coding on the navigation. And sorry, Mandy, I overlooked your comment about the contrast with the helicopters and the river. Contrast of the color with the river and the helicopters. Yeah, it's enough. There's enough contrast to give it some depth and some form and a really intriguing design. Then as we get into more and more contrasts, we get into the complementary colors, the action movies. Or here we have a Van Gogh, which is not at all an action scene, but notice how the interplay of the cool and warm colors plays a part here, though. That idea of the warm colors popping towards you while the cool colors recede into the background, how that helps make the cafe scene our focal point, really brings our attention to it and allows the scenery, which is relevant but not important, to kind of recede away, not really grab our attention. It makes this scene, this little cafe, look very, very lifelike, very, gives it a sense of life and energy. And before class, we were talking about these posters as well. This is one of Drew Struzan's designs. He's a very well-known artist, movie poster artist, known for using complementary red and blue. And this is no example, no exception. And while Back to the Future probably isn't considered an action film, it is a high energy film and has a lot of fun and exciting scenes in it, so that works well here as well. And I wanted to compare these two because I know this one was yours, Randy, the Guardians of the Galaxy. The one on the right is another one of Drew Struzan's paintings from Star Wars, the original Star Wars back in the 70s. And notice the comparison. Clearly an inspiration, an influence on the Guardians of the Galaxy design. I don't think this was Drew Struzan's work, although he is still making posters. But you can see how the influence was there. The colors are different, but still using complementary colors. You had, in Star Wars, you had Drew Struzan's characteristic blue and orange present. There's a little bit of a few other colors in here as well. C-3PO's gold, metal, and there's probably some green in here as well, but mostly you see orange and blue in the space scene, so it's all kind of dark. There's that kind of mysterious sense, but notice the color coding as well. The bad guys are in blue, even Moff Tarkin back here, and Darth Vader, whereas the good guys have their warm color associations. But in the Guardians of the Galaxy, the more modern movie, the complementary colors are a little more complex, as you described. There's green and red complementary pairing with Gamora's skin color and the red explosions and even the highlights in Star-Lord's jacket. And there's also some of the blue and orange in here as well. Yeah, so this is actually getting into what would be called a quadratic color scheme, which uses two pairs of complementary colors. So a little more color rich, but still using that complementary idea, the high contrast. And it adds that sense of excitement. It allows for that. Whereas if the colors are too similar, then they're not going to have that same energy. And we were talking about this one before as well. This is blue and yellow aren't a completely true complementary pair. They're not direct opposites on the color wheel, but they're far enough away to take advantage of that high contrast. So you would call this complementary in describing it. If you were talking with an artist, they would easily refer to that as being complementary, just because, especially because of the Watchman title. Because where does your eye go first? Probably to that Watchman title. And I'm sorry, I'm missing comments. So you said interesting non-color related fact is the placement of the female lead, and that's referring back to Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And with Gamora giving it a very prominent placement there, instead of Luke Skywalker being in the foreground. Good observation. And these are certainly factors to keep in mind, the representations of the characters. And it's become more and more something that's in our kind of global consciousness. This is something that the point I was making about this poster and how the Watchmen title, because it's that high contrast color, becomes the focal point. This is something that's going to be important next week in week 3 when we talk about visual hierarchy, because color contrast is one of the factors that allows something to be the dominant element and become the top of that hierarchy and the most attention-getting thing. So you want to be very strategic in what you give that kind of contrast to, that kind of visual weight, and create a very meaningful experience. That applies here as well. And this one is a really subtle, kind of more subdued use of complementary colors, but the green is complementary to the red, and so it allows that the man's jacket to be what draws our eye, and that becomes our dominant element and the focal point. Another example of that same principle here. Not at all an accident that Harry Potter in his red Gryffindor robes was placed against this green background, because that keeps our attention on him. He is our main character. Draco Malfoy in his Slytherin robes is in the foreground, very prominent, but doesn't have the contrast with the scenery, and so he tends to blend in a little bit. Our eye is really drawn toward Harry. And this would be moving, of course, so it would keep our attention directed towards that character. And I had a slide, actually, wish I deleted it before we started. It's one from my previous months, but it was it showed screen grabs from a newscast, from a newsroom, like an actual real life newsroom. And they use this technique because if you look at a newscast, more often than not, the backdrop will be blue. Sometimes it'll look like there's some kind of control room back there behind them. Sometimes it'll just be a skyline, but it's always blue. It's always a cool color, because all skin tones are in the warm color range. So by putting a blue, cool color background behind them, that keeps your attention on the news anchor or whoever's talking, the talking head that's on the screen. And again, keep giving equal time to other media formats. This is from the world of web design using complementary colors. And you can see the difference between the one we saw before. This one is no longer so reserved. It is more high energy. It's very upbeat. And that matches the tone of the website itself because they're taking a very tongue-in-cheek approach to their web design. This business is a web design business. It says great websites, no lame marketing slogans, and have the little kid with the mustache drawn on and lines like seriously these days everyone and their mom has a website. So obviously they're trying to take a more lighthearted approach, and the color scheme reflects that. So thoughts so far? All right. This is very really useful information in surprising ways. And I don't know if I included the slide, but these factors, these relationships of colors are used in, as I said, in the newsroom, which is one of the more surprising places, but decorating your home. Home decorator, interior designers use the same color wheel. Fashion designers use the same color wheel, same color relationships. And of course, logo designs as well. Just really quick, those were the basic color schemes: monochromatic, analogous, complementary. If you remember 3, those would be the ones. There are varieties or variations on those, though. Like if you have a complementary relationship but have more than 2 colors, then you're getting into split complementary territory. So you might have, in this case, a cool color with 2 warm colors paired against it. So you still have that high energy, high contrast, but greater richness. And we saw an example of the tetratic or quadratic with 2 sets of complementary pairs, tons of color. So really vibrant looking images. This one is used extensively in the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory when they're in the room with all the candy trees and all the colors exploding everywhere. That is an example of this. So this is simply 2 pairs of complementary colors, and we saw that with the Guardians of the Galaxy already as well. So yeah, color theory and typography are sort of lost arts. If you get into graphic design and fine arts, they're certainly still alive there. But for everyday people, they are certainly kind of mysterious and obscure. In the Linda lesson, he emphasized tetratic as one of the basic color schemes. I was kind of surprised because I consider this one kind of out of the ordinary. It is 3 colors that are equally spaced on the color wheel. So if you took the 3 primary colors, as I did here, those would be triadic, but it could be any 3 colors as long as they're equally spaced. And there's your primary colors on Rosie the Riveter, yellow, red, and blue. And it is the middle ground. It is the balance between harmony and contrast that we would see before, because you're no longer taking colors from opposite sides or the same side, you're taking them from evenly spaced places. And here's a modern day example. I had a hard time finding any examples of this from any kind of real world photographs or or more natural media, but it seems to be used pretty commonly in comic books and cartoons and more of that kind of print media. And last, there is achromatic, and we've seen some examples of this already. Achromatic, you think about the meaning of that word, chroma meaning color, and A is no color, achromatic, so it's colorless. This is simply our black and white images, or pen and ink, as the example here from fine art shows. It lacks the benefit of colors, of the color adds in allowing energy, interaction of the colors. So you don't get that. So it can easily be very low energy and depressed. Doesn't necessarily have to be depressing. There are certainly some very elegant black and white images. But you just simply don't have the advantages that we've discussed with picking colors to create those impressions. A trick that's often used, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's an example from The Exploration that someone picked, and this is The Dark Knight Rises. Very dark, very gritty. Looks like a photocopied poster that we might see hung up somewhere. So very much in line with the themes of that movie. One trick you can do with achromatic images is to throw in an accent color, just like we saw with the fake movie poster earlier. And this, again, creates that splash of color that creates a focal point, just like with the complementary colors. So whatever you add that color to now instantly stands out because it is in a colorless environment. This is from Schindler's List, where I think at the end, towards the end of the movie, the girl shows up with the red coat, and it's the first color that we have seen in the movie. So it really stands out. The Frank Miller effect, as Randy says. Yeah, I kind of saw this in that movie in the 300 as well, right? Where it wasn't colorless, but the colors were very muted, and then we had those crazy splashes of blood. Also here in Maleficent, well, this isn't truly colorless. The colors are so desaturated that it's practically achromatic, but then those lips appear and they become they stand out and draw our eye. And probably some symbolic significance there as well. So those are the basic color relationships that you can, there's many, many more possibilities out there, but as far as our needs, that's really it. And in fact, if you just remember analogous versus complementary, you'll go far. One last thing, and then I'll wrap up because we are running a little longer than usual, but we'll revisit this idea of branding with color. These are some examples, and notice that I have an example here of each of the color relationships we looked at, except for achromatic, but actually the Apple brand that's on your computer is an achromatic logo design. But look at these examples here and think about why these examples use these specific color relationships. For example, why does Intel use a monochromatic blue logo design? What impression are they going for there? And why would BP choose green? as their primary color. Okay, so Intel is the blue is trusted, and that is kind of that iconic interpretation of the color blue. And BP chose that to deceive us. And I know where you're going with that. And yeah, what do we think of when we think of green? And that is, green being environmentally friendly. So it's green technologies and so forth. So yeah, it associates itself with the environment. Of course, their recent history is kind of contradicts that, doesn't it? But from a public image standpoint, that's a pretty clever choice. LA Lakers, this is an uncommon complementary pairing that the purple's complement is actually yellow, and this is a little bit more into the gold or orange region, but still has that complementary pairing. So still a good strong contrast. And a really good vibrant split complementary with the Firefox logo and Burger King. I'm not sure why I would say that Burger King went with a triadic, other than it's probably pretty easy to use for print, say on their bags and so forth. Yellow is usually that color that they say is associated with appetite and kind of cues our appetites. But it also has a pretty good amount of color variety and color contrast as well. And he said it's not the best logo. It has been around a while, so it isn't quite as modern as maybe the Firefox or BP logos look. But the reason I wanted to revisit this in particular is because of our project coming up. So you're finishing up the first part of your mood board by tonight. The next part is to add your brand color palette. And that's this weekend's project. So all the factors that we've talked about tonight will be considerations in this. Logos are not all there is to brands, though. A brand is the full extent of that subject's personality. So, if it's Intel or BP or Burger King, their brand is more than just that logo. So the colors should carry beyond the logo as well. And that applies to your projects with the mood boards directly, because you're not just thinking about logo design here, you're thinking about color schemes that will represent your brand throughout all media representations. Here's an example that you should be familiar with, and this is actually the Full Sail colors taken directly from the Full Sail style guide that I obtained from Platinum Creative. They wouldn't allow me to give the color codes, but I can show these. But you see this in the logo, in the basic logo as it would appear on a business card on the white background, orange airplane, and sort of this burnt umber color that they use for the typeface. There's a secondary color of the metallic silver that we see less often, but really these two. But we see that on the logo, but not just the logo. If you look at the catalog, the printed catalogs, these colors are all through it, in the headings, in the title pages, in the little call-outs that give quotations and testimonials. And that's what branding's all about, is creating that consistent look and feel and personality that carries through everything that you do. and not just limiting it to the logos that you put on your product, but make it an integral part of your identity. So that's something I want you to think about as you move into this project, is not just how is my logo going to look? Because a lot of times I'll see that on previous projects that were similar to this, is a focus on either the logo design or how it will appear on a single piece of media, but really it's bigger than that. And so once you start thinking bigger than that. And of course, you might have noticed that my slides use this color scheme as well, trying to keep with the branding. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Well, that is my presentation for tonight. Thank you both for bearing with me through it. A little longer than usual. This was typically going to be the long week. So, but thank you again. And if you do have any questions, be sure to get in touch. Otherwise, I wish you a good evening.